My guest today is Reverend Dr. Anne E. Gillies, Ph.D. Dr. Gillies is trained jointly in psychology and theology and retired from private practice after 25 years of clinical counseling focused primarily on individuals struggling with complex traumatic stress as a result of chronic childhood sexual abuse. She has written a book, Damaged by the Predators Among Us. Dr. Anne E. Gillies, we welcome you to this show. Thank you for being with us today.
It's my pleasure, Laura Lynn. It's good to talk again.
Well, this is hitting like a storm across the United States. This is like an onslaught. It's like an avalanche of exposure of the sexual abuse. And unfortunately, it's actually going on in the church.
Yeah. Well, and this is kind of why I'm thrilled to talk to you today, because one of the things that I've experienced myself, but I've seen many Christians who have actually been abused within the church context, and that is it's heartbreaking because the church should be a place of safety. And the other thing that's really heartbreaking about it is that the general public begins to see the church as, why would we ever want to become a believer? Why would we go to church? Why would we do any of those things that these other people claim are so good? And I would say to them, there's a difference between the people in the church, as there are good and evil everywhere, and the Jesus we follow. Like we want to preach Jesus. We want to talk about Jesus and his goodness and his healing and his redemption. And you know what you've been uncovering in Daystar is heartbreaking. I think for me, the one thing that is really, really concerning, it's not the abuse itself is horrendous. And I mean, I've heard lots of abusive stories. This may not compare to some of them that I've heard, but the cover-up is what really challenges me. As people of God, we are to be, I believe we're to walk in integrity. And if we get caught out in some kind of sin, which, I mean, it's not that sin doesn't happen, it does, but we're supposed to expose it, not cover it up. And so, we see, churches and ministries that do the opposite. They want to cover everything up to protect themselves, to protect their image, rather than protecting the abused children. And that just makes my blood boil a little bit. So
it makes all of our blood boil. And I think that's why this is catching on like a storm. People are very, very upset because not only do they see publicly in Daystar this refusal to bring accountability to an alleged predator that is actually on their staff. Now, he hasn't shown up on the television set for a while. Good for them. But because they are refusing a third-party investigation, they are refusing to actually expose, this has become a problem. And Dr. Gillies, what I'm wondering is, how prevalent is this in the church today, that rather than bring to justice, they're protecting the empire. They're protecting the establishment rather than dealing with this. You've seen case after case of people that have been harmed under the covering, under the roof of a church.
Well, and that's true. And it's not just childhood sexual abuse, but other kinds of sexual improprieties that the church hides. And I remember many years ago, you may remember this, Laura Lynn, but when Jimmy Swaggart, who I loved to listen to his music, when it was exposed of his sexual infidelity. And I remember my heart. I was so hurt. It was like just this deep breaking, because we look up to these people at some level, and maybe that's a problem to start with, right? Maybe we put them on a pedestal, which we shouldn't do, but at the same time, it happens because they tend to put themselves up there, and the more public the face, the more exposed they are, and really, the more likely for the enemy to take them down. Quite honestly, and if they're not on their guard, that will happen. So we're seeing that with Daystar. We're seeing a different level, though, of hiding and finger pointing, and that's really tough because it is really all about their image and not reconciliation. What I've listened to from you, Laura Lynn, and certainly when you've talked about Jonathan and Susie and the things that have been said and done to them, talk about unbiblical. Like, it's just, and then you have the whole
100%.
mother son issue, and I'm like, hold it. There's some stuff going on here, and I would suggest there's probably some mental illness at play here. And if not that, certainly, well, I won't go into detail about what I think about all that, but there is this sense where image is everything, even above your own children.
And
And
when you're so reticent to speak on it, it reminds me of the other people that have contacted me in this regard. And these are whistleblower psychologists who are unwilling, the same as you, to go on because they actually knew Douglas Weiss from years ago, and they can only recommend and say that the diagnosis for someone like this, with all of the information coming, could probably fall into these certain categories, including narcissist, sociopath, histrionic behaviors. And so we have people watching, and you're all very educated and you're experienced. And so you know that you can kind of give it a label, but you're hesitant to do so, and we appreciate that. But there is a lot bad going on. And you wrote this book, Damaged by the Predators Among Us. And a lot of us, including Jonathan and Susie, had no idea that this kind of horrific thing could happen to them, especially in light of an alleged family member. That this is the person who had close proximity. This is the person who took advantage. And could you tell me a little bit about your book, Damaged by the Predators Among Us? Give me some idea of the prevalence in society of this happening.
well, our mutual friend, Marilyn, told me I had to write this book. So it is my family's personal story. And so it is the story of, well, different kinds of sexual experiences that my husband was involved in that I became aware of during our 14-year marriage. But the church, even though I went to the pastor because it was prevalent, nothing was done. Nothing was done. It wasn't until just before our divorce, finally, because my ex-husband went through Bible college, being promiscuous and in a homosexual relationships, multiple. He went into the ministry. He was ordained, and nothing had been done, even though I tried to expose it. And then it was several years later, finally, that he was released from ministry after many times of this. So that was ongoing. What none of us knew, and so the church didn't know this because I didn't know it at the time, and I didn't become aware until after I had remarried to a wonderful man, that my first husband had sexually abused our children from very young ages, under 2 years old. Under 2 years old. And he had sexually abused them our entire marriage. So he was not only in the church, he used the church as a covering, like it was a good place, right? He had sexually abused others previous to our marriage. And, who knows how many others he had abused, because statistically, an abuser, well, a pedophile, let's say that there's a little bit of there's overlap and there's difference, but a pedophile usually abuses between 75 and 150 children, every pedophile. So this is so important to the church to understand that if you do not have safeguards in place, these things are going to happen under your watch in the church, because the church gathers in the wounded. And if they do not treat the trauma and the addictions and all of the things that people bring in with them, they'll also be open doors for pedophiles, because sexual abusers see the church as a wonderful place to get near to children. In fact, my ex-husband, after it had been disclosed about his sexual abuse of our children, a few years later, went back into another denomination and began to teach Sunday school. Sunday school. I found out about it after about 3 months. I phoned the pastor. I said, do you know what you are doing here? Do you know what you're exposing these children to? You need to deal with this immediately, or I'm reporting it. And they did deal with it. And I was going to report it anyways.
And
but they
thank
dealt
God.
with it.
What is the psychology, Dr. Ann? What is behind someone like Joni Lamb being at the top of an organization, repeatedly having a pattern of cover-up, not even acknowledging a crazy chiropractor, which was an essay, not to a child, but to a woman. And as we disclosed yesterday on my show, if any of you have not seen yesterday's show, you must see the firsthand account of this chiropractor acting bizarre before the essay of Susie Lamb. And this information of his odd behavior is disclosed to the higher up of Daystar, and nothing's done. And the whole protection, in order to what? To protect, I mean, if you deal with something correctly, why would it be a bad thing against the organization? It's actually a bad thing now against the organization. 17 people have pulled out of Daystar. People are withdrawing their funds like crazy. They're stopping. I've just heard from another organization today that they're having to consider leaving because their donations are way down because of what is happening. Because why? Because people are upset that the church, which Daystar is registered as a church, but it's not a church, but Christian organizations are covering for pedophiles. What is the psychology behind this? This goes way back, Dr. Ann. This goes back to when you had your issues and you tried to disclose, you tried to, deal with your husband's, deviance.
Sexual
deviance. And they didn't listen then either. What is going on?
Well, I think this let's turn a blind eye because we need pastors, or we need people in ministry, or we need, I can't even speak to why it wasn't addressed. Really, looking back, it was, that was like 40, how many years ago? Yeah, 40 years ago. So there's,
one of the things I wonder, Dr. Ann, is if we have more pedophiles in high places than we're willing to acknowledge or look at.
So here's what I've been questioning in the last couple of years. Is there a possibility of pedophile rings operating within churches? And, I can't I'm not suggesting that about Daystar. I'm not suggesting that. What that is simply a cover up to look good. I think with Joni, I think it goes back far deeper for her. I think there's some things that for her, she wants approval. She wants, a lot of different things. And I think that really is superimposed on everything. And I don't know her, so I can't speak to the mental stuff going on and her actions directly. But from what I'm seeing, there is this sense of we have to at all costs cover this up. But let's go back to Rabbi Zacharias. You know that name, and many of you know that name. His entire ministry. I mean, he was involved in infidelity. And he was a theologian of all. I mean, he was incredible. Loved listening to that man. And then we find out after his funeral, things are exposed. We have to do better. We have to do better in screening people, and it's very hard. I think, quite honestly, I think pastors, especially in large churches, should have a psychological assessment. There you go.
That would be amazing. I mean, we do it for some CEOs in business. Why not for the
Absolutely.
most important institution, the church? That people should be screened, because the loss of trust, we don't trust the church anymore. And all of these allegations and sexual deviance that we see, and you talk about sex rings, what better place? Because you actually, in your book and such, you talk about how predators exploit institutional trust. We believe that we're safe here, that our children are safe to go to Sunday school.
Yeah.
We believe that because it should be the case. And then you find out, that we've got a big problem. I mean, when it all came out about Pete at Daystar, one of the things that happened was Gateway Church was contacted multiple times asking, has this guy had any access to children? Because now all of a sudden they're afraid that their children have been affected, because people trust the church. And so predators use this. So why not? This is the whole, issue in the Catholic Church. They just move the predators around rather than dealing with them and putting them in jail where they should be, rotting till they die.
It's not just the Catholic Church. I mean, a year ago, I was involved in some counseling and some things with the church, and there had been some things happen in the church with some of the teens. And see, pornography and our media has just corrupted so many young people. I mean, what they see as acceptable now is deviance. And it is sexual abuse. Anyways, long story short, the pastor wouldn't deal with it. And, what ended up happening, he moved on to another church. This is what is just mind-boggling. There is no accountability, and we need to see accountability within the body of Christ. If this was a business, my goodness, it would be exposed. It was politicians, it would be exposed. And until they would be removed from whatever position they had until there was a thorough investigation, and either they were deemed innocent or the axe fell. And so why is the church so complacent? Because we want to love everyone, right? And I get it. I'm like that. I want to believe the best in everyone, but we can't do that. We have children to protect. And if we're not protecting our own children, we need to protect those children around us. Heavens, I remember the years that people used to send their children on little yellow buses to church, to Sunday school. And, looking back, I think they were very trusting. And most of the time it was fine. I'm not suggesting that there was always predators lurking, but I believe times have changed and the predators are lurking, and we need to be aware that they're lurking in every place that there are vulnerable children and parents who are not particularly watching over their children, or they're very naive. Well, look at me. I was married to this man for 14 years who habitually sexually abused my children, and I didn't know. I didn't even know. That's how good and how gifted they are at cover up and manipulation.
Wow.
And, finally it gets exposed, but the damage to my children. And for a long time, they couldn't believe I didn't know either. But he threatened to kill them or to kill me. So they weren't going to talk, and it's like we have to be, and that's why I do what I do, Laura Lynn. And that's why I went back to school and became a psychotherapist because I so want to protect children. I didn't protect my own, and that's my failure. I live with that. I know God's forgiven
So
me. I
difficult.
didn't know, it wasn't purposeful, but it's easy enough to happen, and we need accountability. So my ex-husband, his sexual deviance and the knowledge of that should have traveled with him from church to church. And that's what we need to have happening. We need accountability with the pastors and all leadership. They should have, well, they should have the police checks, not just the ones in our Sunday school, teaching our Sunday school, but the pastors. And I think psychological assessments, I think that would, it's not going to be the end be all and end all. Things can be missed, but it would certainly go a long way.
Dr. Ann, in your situation, I'm sure that the audience is probably wondering as well, like, was justice brought in your situation? Were you able to deal with this predator that lived in your home?
So we did about 3 years after it was disclosed, and Children's Aid and the police interviewed my one son, and they didn't. My other two children at that time just kind of went, "Nope, never happened to us." That they were teens at that age, and they lied. We found out later, but the
that's
son,
actually that's common, because people
yes,
like who have been traumatized, they don't want more trauma. They have been threatened, so they don't know
yeah.
if he's going to kill you. They don't know if he's going to kill them. They're terrified of this man. And so unfortunately, this makes it even more difficult to bring justice.
Well, and they were terrified. They were, and the younger son was 11 at the time that he disclosed, and he was 13 by the time I went to court. But they had to bring my former husband back into Ontario. He was in Quebec at that time, and when they did that, the police came and told us that they were bringing him back to face charges in Ontario. And my son, who had disclosed, he just began to exhibit a lot of behavioral, like he became hypervigilant. He would go to bed at night, and then he'd come down and check all the doors, and he'd never done that before. And after a couple nights of this, my husband, second husband, said, "Why are you doing that?" And he said, "I am terrified he's going to come and kill me." And so my husband, and you know him, Laura Lynn, quiet,
He's a beautiful man that God has given you to
God has given me
restore
a wonderful
peace
man.
to your home.
Anyways, and I'm not going to say exactly what he said, but he said to my son, "If he steps on this property, I will nail his to the fence post."
Good.
And I'm like, I'm like, this is a lot of years ago. I'm thinking, you can't say that to my son. But for my son, he never did that again. Never. It was like
He felt
could sleep
safe.
at night. He was protected, and that's what these children need. They need protection, and so that's why I'm annoyed with Daystar. I mean,
There's
it's
more
very
children
sad.
susceptible to Pete, and the cover up, the mental gymnastics you have to do to not do the right thing, and to have actually allowed different people to have misinformation all over the internet, such as Marcus Rogers, just nonsense, but to actually not do the right thing in this situation is it's reprehensible. And
It's
I
evil.
think that's the outcry of the people that's happening right now. They will not tolerate it. They will not put up with it anymore. They are asking for justice. They are asking
Yes.
the church, just not beyond Daystar. The Daystar is like, it has become a symbol of where we're going to stand. And it has taken off because everyone's talking about it, and it won't stop until it's dealt with. Just say that.
And it needs to be, there need to be some serious conversations in denominational leadership, within denominational leadership. There needs, and I mean, done better in the last 25 years. Overall, I think there's been improvement. But, these sex abusers are manipulators. They will slip through the cracks. And so the church needs to be upping their game. They need to protect all the people. And that includes, when you think of children, I think of the vulnerable, teenagers. I'm not just talking about the young children, but the teens. And so what about youth pastors? And I know I'm casting a dark shadow, and I apologize for that, but
we have to, in a way. It's come to this. We haven't been able to trust that you would expose, that you would make sure that they are imprisoned, that you would go the length to make this a very fearful thing. You touch a child, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the most powerful and, violent things that Jesus himself said was, if you harm a child, you better just put a big chain around your neck with an anchor to it and throw yourself in the ocean, because that's going to be better for you than the way God will deal with you. This is not okay. And the church has gone soft on it, whether it's mercy showing, I don't know what you call it. I'm inclined to think, like what you said, we've got some sex predator, rings set up so that they are all undercover and they know it. Now, I'm not saying that is in every place, but it's out there. They're using the church, and the church, even good people, have not been wise enough to put a stop to this.
We have to really look at individuals' character and watch their behavior. And you asked me a question earlier about my ex-husband. Was he brought to justice?
Yes.
And I will say the police were excellent with my son. They expected conviction. But after 4 days, and this was 35 years ago, my son testified for 3 of those days at court. It was abusive. They don't do that anymore, but it was horrendous for him in front of his biological father, who had abused him. It was so abusive. And the 4th day, the day of sentencing, and my son had a psychologist, and he had people supporting him as well. And we had a wonderful pastor. So please hear me out. There are some wonderful pastors out there, and we had one. Thank
Amen.
God. It was him that my son wanted to talk to, first of all, after he told us. So, but the bottom line is, the evidence was presented, and it was good, except it was my son's word against my former husband. The Crown attorney, and now I know so much more now, but the Crown attorney said, I don't need these other people who were adults at the time to testify. Your son's case is rock solid. 4th day of, guilty or not, this is what the judge, I will never, ever forget his words. He looked at me and he said, I totally believe what your son has said. And then he paused, and I thought, oh, thank God. And then he said these words, but I can't disbelieve everything your husband has said. And he acquitted him. That's really not guilty or guilty. It's just acquitted.
Wow, devastating.
And I'm like, I was so shocked. And there were a lot of others in the courtroom that were shocked. And I've talked to a couple other women who have been through very similar circumstances, Christian women whose husbands have sexually abused their children. And they had the same exact words from different judges. Tell me what that is about. There is evil in the camp.
Well, you have to wonder if judges are not in sex rings as well.
I believe that, and I look back and think, there's something fishy going on. But at that point, I was in so much shock, and now I would appeal it. But I couldn't put my son through more. It was already so much.
So sorry.
And I think We need to understand, and the ramifications for children who have been chronically sexually abused hundreds of times in their young lives. And not only, see, it wasn't only my ex-husband, it was his boyfriends. And when I found that out, things come out piece by piece with kids, right?
Right.
We didn't know that for a few years after. And then it was like, oh my goodness. But my son's story is in this book, Damaged by the Predators Among Us. He had the guts to tell his story. And it's heartbreaking. But people need to understand this is reality. And it's a harsh reality. It's a horrible reality, but there's nothing new under the sun. A lot of people have said, "Oh, couldn't even open a book like that." This is a problem. Get your head out of the sand. If you can't even look at a book and read something like that, which I get, it is, who wants to deal with it? I didn't want to deal with it. But we have to start facing reality and dealing with these things. And if we can't read about what has happened in such evil ways, then how are we ever going to stop it?
100%. My final question to you today is, I know that there's pastors and leaders that are tuning in, that are understanding that we have a problem, and they don't want to be part of the problem. They want to be part of the solution. What mechanisms do you suggest to leaders and pastors? We've talked about a little bit about, that people need to be, certainly you need to have criminal checks done on them, but your comment about having psychological evaluations, I guess it's hard to say, oh, okay, we'd love to have you come and be our youth group leader, but we just need you to go through an evaluation. And maybe that's too much on the general, but there are things that could be put in place, such as, I'm thinking, that you're never alone with children, that would be a policy in a church, that no one adult is ever, not even a bathroom trip during Sunday school time, because kids have to go to the bathroom. And that they should be able to go alone, and if they're small enough that there needs to be assistance, there would always be two present.
Well, most churches have started that, but we have to even look further. We can't I don't believe we should be sending young boys, little young boys, I'm thinking under 10 or 11, with teenage boys to the bathroom.
Yes.
Like, we have to up the game in every area, because there's so much evil, and they've watched so much porn, and it's just so easy to recreate those things in such a short time. And so, yes, we have to be hyper vigilant. I'm going back to what I said, because I think this is really, really true, that it will cost the church, whether a church or denomination, to have psychological evaluations. I think it's like $2,500 or something. It's not cheap, but I believe that should be done before someone is hired. And they should have police checks. I know they have police checks to work with children in the church, but I don't know that the pastors have to have police checks. And it's different for different areas of the country, of course. The other thing I would suggest, and this man, Laura Lynn, John Mueller, my friend John Mueller, I think you've had him on.
Yes.
He has,
amazing, man.
He has on his website survivor support. He also does a lot of outlining for churches how to protect. I think it's called Church Protect. He is the only person I know or that I'm aware of that really directly discusses some of these things and provides some outlines for churches and for individuals within the church. And that's what we need. We need to be hiring John to do that all over, honestly, because he understands pedophilia at a deep level as well.
And you speak all over the world. You do conferences, and you come to churches, and you help to prepare, and you also bring healing. Because can people heal from this kind of terrible abuse? It's so bad, and often they leave the church. They leave the church because they're so hurt by the church. Speak to me. I know I said the last question was one more, but one more thing about where we go to help people heal, because I'm getting all kinds of letters now saying that actually this whole thing that's happened with Daystar is healing for them, because they suddenly see that everyone is talking about it. Everybody is willing to do something. Everyone is outraged. And for many people, as in the case of your sons, there wasn't an outcry for them. There wasn't public rage against sexual abuse in the church. And it's happening now.
Well, that's right. I mean, he was heard by our pastor, thank God. And we believed him totally. I mean, you couldn't disbelieve what he was telling. Anyways. But you're right. I think the reality of having their stories told, and for each person out there who has experienced sexual abuse at any level, whether it's chronic childhood sexual abuse, it's date rape, it's gang rape. I mean, it's all horrific. I really, really recommend you see a trauma therapist, not, and if you can find a Christian trauma therapist, that is the best. But just going to a counselor or even a psychologist who doesn't specialize in trauma care or is not trauma informed is not enough. You need to have someone who specifically deals in that area, because there's such a deep need for healing, and it's not easy. It's especially with the chronic sexual abuse. Sometimes clients start and they get to a certain point and it's so painful, they walk away. And then with my experience was that I think all but one came back a few weeks later and began again. But it's so painful because you're dealing with all of this long-standing hurt. And when it's a family member, this is what is really concerning about Daystar as well. When it's a family member, the child feels responsible for exposing, and even if they hadn't done it, exposed it themselves, they feel responsible and guilty. And we want to take that off of the child's plate. They should not have that experience. They have enough shame and guilt from what happened. We want to relieve them of that. So getting good trauma care. And that sometimes means if you've had extensive sexual abuse, you're not looking at 6 weeks of counseling or trauma care. You're looking at 2 to 3 years. And that's people are going, oh, wow, that's horrible. Well, this is where we should be putting our tax dollars. We would get the addicts off the street. We would stop crime. Don't get going, Laura Lynn. Anyways, you know what I mean. If we would focus on getting the real needs met, we would see a whole change in our culture and society.
And maybe that's where churches can put their funds, their millions of dollars that they're raising, because it's a lucrative business to have a church. Daystar is lucrative. Daystar, a good move by Joni right now would be to invest in counseling for people that have endured sexual abuse, to invest in healing centers from sexual abuse. That'd be a good move, good PR move, Eric Voles, on your part, because this has been traumatizing, what has happened, what we've seen them do, but it is also healing to see all of the people that are speaking on it, and you are speaking on it. Thank you, Dr. Ann Gillies. Damaged by the Predators Among Us. This is available on Amazon, and I do urge everyone to get this book, Damaged by the Predators Among Us. Every pastor should have this book. Everyone should have this book. And if you have a church that is open to having Dr. Ann come and speak on and do her presentation on protecting your church, getting your church ready for the next steps to be a safe zone in our society, then you'll want to have Dr. Ann. And thank you so much, my friend. Thank you for what you do, for the price you've paid. You've paid such a big price, actually. And I know about some of it personally, but in order to do what you do, and you've written how many books?
6 now.
Yeah, 6. You're amazing. You're my hero. So keep doing it. This says that you retired from private practice after 25 years, but obviously you are not at rest. So we
No.
appreciate
Well, I
you.
just thank God. I mean, I thank God because without him, I would never have made it through. So, no matter how negligent sometimes people in the church can be, God's never negligent and he loves you.
Amen. Thank you, my sister. God bless and take care.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Wow, just amazing. She is incredible, and I do know her personally, but some of the things that, she didn't have time to even get into, the healing that she's able to bring because of what they had to endure as a family. It's so important. And I do believe that this is the way forward, that churches would be more engaged in ensuring that they are predator-free. You need a predator-free church. From the pastor all the way down to the ushers and those that help in the parking lot, this should be a predator-free zone. Because you know how it is. If people want to gain access to children, they find their way into that. And we can't be ignorant. Jesus has no patience or tolerance for predators on children. He has none. He has never asked us to be patient or tolerant with predators on children. He gave the gravest warning, and we should heed that. I thank God for Dr. Ann.